Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Catherine Andrews.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. You can also find us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. We're here in the Heartland holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Catherine. We are continuing our series of interviewing the amazing presenters that will be at the Global Spiritual Awakening Conference, which is coming up, guys. It's this Saturday and Sunday, the 16th and 17th. If you have not gotten your ticket yet, go get your ticket. It's going to be an amazing event, globalspiritualawakeningconference.com. And today we have one of the speakers that will be at the event, Paul Young. And if you have not read any of his books, they are very intriguing. He is the author of several best-selling novels, The Shack, Crossroads, Eve, and recently he's published a nonfiction book, Lies We Believe About God. I think a lot of people have lies about God. Paul has a very interesting childhood. He was raised among a Stone Age tribe by his missionary parents in West Papua New Guinea. And so, Paul, welcome.
Well, thank you, Catherine and Patrick. Honored
Hi,
to be
Paul.
with you. Hi.
So I was like, I have never heard of a Stone Age tribe before. So why don't we begin there, Paul? And can you tell us a little about your childhood and what that was like?
I'm a firstborn missionary kid, preacher's kid. So I was born in Grand Prairie, Alberta, Canada. And when I was 10 months old, my parents and I packed everything that we had and we moved to the other side of the world. And New Guinea is the big island right above Australia. And half of it was a Australian colony and the other half a Dutch colony. So it was a Dutch colony when we first went there. And then it went through a UN transition, and then it was annexed by the Indonesians. So there's 4 children in our family. I had a Canadian passport. My sister had a Dutch passport. My brother had a UN passport, and my youngest brother had an Indonesian passport.
Wow.
And the three of them were all born in the same place. The unusual thing about New Guinea is that on this one island, there are more than 800 unrelated language groups.
Wow.
And it's just like, English right next door to Chinese, no common language. And the barriers between the tribes had more to do with geography than it had to do with anything else. So, and we were part of a large tribe. The Dani tribe was 20 to 40,000 people over 100 square miles. There were some tribes that only had a few hundred people in it. But we were in what was called the Balim Valley, which was nicknamed Cannibal Valley. And that's because the Dani practiced ritualistic cannibalism. And so we were the first ones from outside that culture into the place that we went. And I was a year old. So Dani was my first dreaming language. Dani was my culture that I grew up inside. In fact, I didn't even realize in a conscious way that I was white till I was sent to boarding school when I was 6. And it was a huge disappointment.
Oh.
So I'm still kind of angry about it. But that's the world that I grew up in, and so how you grow up you consider normal until you get exposed to outside. And so I was sent away to boarding school, missionary boarding school, when I was 6, and then I was right around 10 when my parents and my siblings came back to Canada. And then my father became an itinerant pastor, and so we traveled around. We moved a lot, 13 schools before I graduated high school. And I went to Bible school, and then my third year, at the end of my third year, and they didn't post any scholarships for me because I'm paying my own way. I was a rock and roll disc jockey on the side, so which is sort of an anomaly for a Bible school, but
Yeah.
My friends asked why there was no scholarship, and the administration said, we've determined he's not a good investment for the denomination, which is true. I mean, they were right.
Oh, wow.
And but so I ended up finishing my undergraduate degree. Actually, I was intending to go to LA, but I ended up in Portland, Oregon, Gresham, Oregon. And that's where I finished my undergraduate degree, did some seminary work, met Kim. And Kim and I have now been married for 40 years. We have 6 children, 4 of them married, 12 grandchildren who are 12 years old and under. And it's awesome. I love being a grandparent. And it's a whole different thing than being a parent.
Oh yeah, you get to play with them during the day, feed them sugar, and then send them home to mom and dad. Right?
Well, I think it goes way deeper than that. I think that hopefully by the time you're a grandparent, your kids already beat the snot out of your self-centeredness. And with your grandchildren, it's really more about them. And there's an ability to be present. And my kids experienced that. Kim's dad lived with us for 17 years and passed away on his 84th birthday in 2002. But my children benefited immensely from a multi-generational family environment. And they would tell you that the 3 most significant people in their lives were their parents and grandpa, and not necessarily in that order either. But he had an ability to fill in the gaps when either Kim and I couldn't because of whatever we were going through. So
oh, sure.
It's a great gift. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Paul, now I believe that we choose everything in life. We choose our parents, we choose the time period, we choose the place. So do you think that you specifically chose this very interesting childhood with a lot of change? And what do you think your soul wanted to learn from that experience?
Yeah. Well, I'm not one who thinks that we make that choice from outside. I actually think that, we come into being through the process of participation, that my parents participated with the very character and nature of God to bring in about a human being. And that, yeah, I'm filled with the genetics and their traditions and history and all of that is part of how I'm wired. But I think that all the elements, because you know what, if you stood outside my world and knew what I went through, I mean, the ends don't justify the means. And the kind of losses that a lot of us experience, the fact that something beautiful can be birthed out of that, to me, is not because you had, prescient knowledge, because to me that would vacate the process of the emerging soul. But that's just my opinion as well. And so I don't think that I chose this. I think that I was birthed into it. I think that I came in pretty clean and very innocent, and then, when you experience a father who has no chip for being a dad, and sexual abuse started happening for me in the culture before I was 5, and then when I was shipped to boarding school, the big boys would come at night and molest the little boys, and there are parts of that just tear the fabric of the human soul apart, and if there's some kind of sense of justification because of some premonition or prescient knowledge, I'm like, no, some things are just wrong, and there has to be a place, or else lamenting and grieving would not be a legitimate part of human experience. And so I sort of approach it from a different point of view than that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying, nope, some things are just flat out wrong. They're just wrong, no matter how you look at it. And the fact that the divine and love and all of that can redemptively, in a genius sort of way, craft goodness out of loss is, to me, absolutely miraculous and an evidence of our participation. And so there's, for me, just an amazing sense of wonder. But at the same time, I can take a stand and say, no, this is absolutely wrong. There is no way that you can justify, even as a result of looking at the ends, you cannot justify the means.
So were there some positive aspects of growing up in this type of community?
Yes, huge, absolutely. In fact, even though my abusers in the first place were tribal members, it's as close to a sense of being an abusive situation within a family context, because I was not connected to my parents at all. I mean, they were busy doing the work of God and in the mission and all of that. And I grew up tribal, and I was around the conversations when I was like 5 years old where the tribal folk were trying to decide whether to kill my parents or not. And I didn't feel in any danger. And so to me, the sense of belonging was there to begin with inside the tribal culture. Also, looking back at my history in my life, the exposure to a multicultural environment was incredibly helpful, because even though it then came along with its own set of baggage, for example, third culture kids, and that's a term that was coined by psychologists for those children who grow up in a culture that's different from their passport culture. And by the time they get to their passport culture, which for me would be Canadian, they don't belong in that passport culture. But by the time that they then go back to the culture that they grew up in, they don't belong there either. So they end up outside of a sense of belonging to any cultural frame of reference. Now, the good part of that is that they have an ability, if they can get past their damage, they have an ability to look at things from outside the box. And a lot of the way that I write is outside the box. In fact, when I wrote The Shack, Kim said to me, she's the one that was the catalyst. And I've written all my life, but it was just poetry and songs and short stories for friends and family. I'd never considered publishing anything. And I didn't The Shack either. But she's the one that said, someday as a gift for our kids, would you just write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box? So she was aware that a lot of my perspectives were outside. Now, when you're damaged, you use those perspectives as part of your survival skills, and it empowers you to hurt people. It really does, because I'm not a very big human being. I'm like 5'6" and a wish is what I am. But I learned how to craft words and use words to just to cut a 300-pound man to the quick. And I weaponized language because I didn't have a physical capacity to defend myself with. And so the multicultural part allows you to then see things from outside. And again, anybody who's read my stuff, they know that I play with metaphor, and I play with imagery that is not standard and inside the box. So even I talk about modern evangelical fundamentalist Protestants, as my people, and they are my people. But they're the ones who have the hardest time with me, simply because they're used to a particular sort of box, and I just don't fit inside of it, which is a good thing and a challenging thing at the same time.
Since you've had such wildly different cultural experiences, do you have any insights in terms of the human condition, what unites us as a species?
Yes, absolutely. I've got very strong feelings about that. In fact, it's because the issue of the divisions within humanity is incredibly troubling and very grievous. And so, I've been on a lifelong hunt to try to get unification within my own heart, between my heart and my mind, and within my own soul, let alone within the context of the larger community of humanity. And so the older that I've gotten and the more healthy that I've become as a human being, now, I'm looking more and more outwardly and going like, what could possibly unify us? And to me, it comes down to the ontology of what it means to be a human being. And ontology is a big word. It comes from two Greek words, ontos and logos. And ontos is being, B-E-I-N-G. What is the truth of who you are? What is true that is true that is true that is true? That experience doesn't, it may cover it up, but it doesn't change it. Or, genetics may cover it up in its own kind of damaging way, but it doesn't either change it and it doesn't diminish it. It is like, who are you as it? And I think ontologically, our humanity itself is a basis for unity. But what we've done is that we've made the way of our being, not our ontology, but our experiences, our culture, our background, the abuse we've experienced, the successes, however that's defined, that we've experienced. All of those things we've then made the issue for unity and disunity, and we're at each other as a result, because we don't begin with our ontology. We begin with our existential experience or the way of our being. And one of the things that I'm just centered on is this little statement that I got from a friend of mine who's a theologian, Baxter Kruger. And about, 6-7 years ago, he just dropped this little nugget that I've been camping on for the last years. And it's simple. It's like wholeness, WHOLENESS, wholeness. Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being. So if you want to know whether you're a whole person or not, is the way of your being, does it match the truth of your being? So the question then is, what's the truth of your being? And that's where some of my tradition and background, I think, is incredibly helpful. Now, I'm somewhat of an antagonist to religious systems. I just have a problem. But you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is so much truth that is embedded inside the systemic issues of religious stuff. And my tradition talks about that humanity is made in the image and likeness of God. And so the question is, if that's true, what is the truth about the character and nature of the divine? And that's where you start with things like love, not just any kind of love, but other-centered, self-giving, sacrificial love. Goodness, and goodness in the most deepest human sense, and even transcending that which is beautiful and right and just in the best sort of way. And truth-telling, or all of these elements of the character of the divine. And if we're made in the image and likeness, then that is the ontology of what it means to be human. And if we can begin to focus on our humanity that we have in common, and to use my tradition language, that every human being is a child of God, that we originate from the very being of the divine, that you will not meet a human being who is not an expression of the divine. If we could start there, then we would have a place to stand on in terms of our unity as humanity. But we've just made all the ways of being, we actually think that there's all this different ontology in humanity, and we identify it with color of skin, or we identify it with religious background, or with gender, or on and on it goes. And it's like, no wonder we can't get no wonder we can't come to a realization, which I think is happening slowly and incrementally, about the truth of our being, so that the way of our being can naturally match it. You get your ontology wrong, you get everything wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. I think Gary Zukov, I think, describes it as when the soul syncs with the personality, rather than personality hindering the soul, which, I guess you could say the true self or whatever. I think you're saying similar, just different words.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So since we kind of got on the topic of God, you've just written a new nonfiction book, which is different for you because you've mainly focused on novels in the past. Right. Lies we believe about God.
Sure. And largely I'm speaking to my own people. That is, I'm using the language of my tradition and history to try to find a way to include and help my people to transcend the limitations of their own religious rigidity. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Because a lot of where I come from and where my people are stuck is inside fear and shame. I think those are the two greatest motivators that are dismantling of our humanity, or at least it doesn't dismantle our humanity, but it definitely covers it up. And And lies cover up the truth. Well, obviously, you can have truth without a lie, but you can't have a lie without truth. And so truth is something much more fundamentally real than lies are, because lies very existence are dependent on something else, where truth, it's not. It's in the very being of the divine. So
Yes.
So for me to deal with the lies that we believe, I'm going after things that are promoters of shame and promoters of fear, because I think those are two of the most destructive adoptions that we've been dragged into, either through our personal experience or through what we then turn around and perpetrate based on the lies that we believe. And a lot of it goes back to what we've already talked about, and that is, what is our ontology as human beings, and who's included and who's not, and how does religious thinking then, that a lot of us have come out of, frankly, or a lot of us are wrestling with. And I think that's part of this global spiritual awakening that's happening. But if you don't find language that bridges from where people are, you end up leaving them behind. And I don't want my people left behind. In fact, I don't want anybody left behind. And,
so when you say people, Paul, just to be clear, are you talking about the Stone Age tribe that you grew up in?
Oh, no. Well, I could be talking about them, but when I talk about my people, I'm talking about my religious heritage. I'm talking about modern evangelical fundamentalists, and the kind of doctrinal, because my tradition goes all the way back, into the early church, and Athanasius and Irenaeus and all of that, and then back into the Jewish culture in terms of the Hebrew scriptures. And so there's a long history. And it's like, so why is it that we believe we actually trust some really beautiful things, and yet the way of our being has been so incredibly divisive and damaging on this planet? Why have we done so much damage based on something that should be obviously beautiful?
Well, I kind of think that a lot of the guilt and the fear that's instilled in people through religion was a form of control.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
But control is based on fear.
Yes.
And it's not the issue of guilt. Guilt is that I've done something wrong, and that's legit. I mean, I've hurt people, and I was wrong. So guilt is legit, but shame is not. Shame is an ontological attack. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong. And that distinction is really important, because one is talking about the way of my being, that is, I've hurt people, or I've been hurt and they were wrong, or our ontology, the truth of my being. And that's why shame is a much more accurate term for that which is destructive in the human heart than guilt is. We got to deal with guilt, because we, even as culture, have hurt people. I mean, what we live in, the United States of America, that exists because we just destroyed Aboriginal and tribal people. And so, but that's part of the inheritance that those of us who are born now enter into. And it's like, okay, so what do we do with that? We've got to deal with that in terms of reconciliation. But shame just doesn't have a place, and it's wrong no matter how you look at it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, now what would you say that you came across a couple of the biggest lies that people believe about God?
One is that we're separated. And that's a highly centered religious. In fact, I think that religion it depends on usually three things. And I think you can find this in all religious systems, because I don't think that God or the divine, and I don't think that the divine is religious at all. And that human beings have crafted religion. And I agree with you, Catherine, that they've crafted it in order to have a sense of control. And that's because they're afraid. And so the three things that religion needs are separation, magic, and I'm using magic in the term of non-relational power. And then the third thing would be sacrifice. So, which is embedded into most religious systems. But this sense of separation is, for religious folks who are in charge for the system to have job security, they have to have separation. Because if I can convince you you're separated from the divine, then I can then tell you that I'm the one that knows how to get unseparated.
Exactly.
And we can be alienated, there's no doubt about it. But again, I don't think that there is any separation ontologically in terms of the truth of our being. The way of our being, we can believe all kinds of lies, including that we're separated. And when we believe a lie, we will experience life within the context of that lie. And so our lives will look separated because we've adapted something that's actually not true. And the way of our being will then, it's just like if you believe you're a piece of garbage, at the core of your being, which a lot of my people do. They call it a sin nature or total depravity or all kinds of stuff. But if you believe that the truth of your being is that you're a piece of garbage or a piece of crap or whatever, then how are you supposed to get the way of your being to do anything other than match it? And there's this verse in the scriptures that I love that says, as a person thinks in their heart, in the deepest place of their being, so are they. Not ontologically, but experientially.
Oh, we
got to attack that.
We're going to head into our break right now.
Okay.
And so we'll be back on the other side here of the break. And if you have not already registered for the Global Spiritual Awakening Conference, it is happening this weekend, the 16th and 17th. So this is Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio and Honest Talk Radio, and we will see you on the other side. Welcome back from the break. If you're just joining us, this is Spirit's Journey with Patrick and Catherine Henrys coming to you from Truth Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Honest Talk Radio.
Hey everyone, we have an exciting guest today. We're talking to Paul Young, who's going to be one of the presenters at the Global Spiritual Awakening Conference this weekend, the 16th and 17th. So go online and get your tickets. You're not going to want to miss it. You've heard a lot of the presenters over the past month and a half with us, and they're going to be doing different workshops, presentations of their signature work. And so, Paul, we have been having this fascinating discussion about different cultures growing up in very different circumstances and community. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask, because my husband and I, we've lived in different communities ourselves, different spiritual communities, and there's a lot of great things about them. And, there's some downfalls, but we are really seeing that, part of the evolution now for people seeking spirituality is the ability to be able to live in community, because it seems like we used to community used to be the big thing. Then cities grew up, people started getting separated. And now we're kind of coming back to this idea, and people are seeking out communities of like-minded people. And so I wanted to get your perspective on what do you think would be the elements to create a healthy community?
Well, I think at the core of it is healthy human beings.
Yes.
So I think that if we will just do the work ourselves and allow that to spill over. Also, I think that like I grew up in a very family structured kind of community environment, and lots of extended family, lots of multi-generational connections, and a lot of cultures in the world have that. In the West, we've sort of lost that, and I think that's very, very difficult. Right? Even young people who are getting married now, they sort of have to start like from scratch. It's their experience of their own family. They have nobody that is there to help, and so there is this sense of connectedness or a sense of belonging that is at the core that is so important. But it's going to come back to, am I willing to do the work myself? Am I willing to step outside of the limitations of the way that I grew up and the kinds of structures that I believed, because a lot of us think that the way we grew up was the right way. And And it's like, oh no, we need to have a way bigger conversation than that. And I need to get out of the seat of judgment, because if I don't, I'm going to be one of the ones that continues to create division, and that's not good.
I think it was either Lao Tzu or Confucius. I don't remember exactly which one said this, but they were talking about, to have a healthy world, you need a healthy nation. To have a healthy nation, you need a healthy state. To have a healthy state, you need a healthy city. To have a healthy city, you need healthy families. And to have a healthy family, you need a healthy individual.
That's so true, I think. I think that's true. And I think probably both of them said it.
Probably, yeah.
They were wise enough people where that would make total sense to me. And I see it played out. If you don't have healthy people at the core, you immediately have divisions starting right at the most fundamental relationships. And then things just disintegrate from there.
Well, and one of the things we've noticed, which I think is a spinoff of what happens in a lot of religions, we've had some people that started beautiful communities with, amazing intentions and so forth. But what happened in several cases was, the power. One person decided they wanted to be the leader. And, and then that started just causing this disintegration where people were like, well, wait, we got away from religion and top down structures. That's why we wanted a community. But then it would start up again, that same scenario of top down power.
Yeah. Oh, and this same kind of temptation is there within, the movement of spirituality as well. You can, this spirituality, quote unquote, is becoming like a multi-billion-dollar industry. And when that starts to happen, when money becomes the basis for how this is all unfolding, all the temptations for hierarchy and power and this subtly become a part. So suddenly, spirituality, which is aimed at the wholeness of the person and the community, etc., suddenly becomes now another means to cover up the fact that we're afraid. We're afraid of economic insecurity. We're afraid of, you start going down the list, and it's just like, oh my goodness, So spirituality itself can morph into becoming a religious movement, just like any other religion had, based on the same sorts of things. And suddenly there's the in-group and there's the out-group and there's the elitists and there's those who really know what they're doing, and it becomes really complicated. And now, only those who are in the know truly have the secret magic. And it's like, oh boy, here we go again. So at some point we have got to begin to trust in things that are much simpler, the childlikeness of relationships and human goodness, and look beyond the presentation of what a human being is to the truth of who they are, and begin to call out the truth of who they are. And otherwise we just go back to, well, let's just put a different name on the same old religious stuff. Frankly, I'm not that interested.
Well, that's kind of the power struggle that we were talking about, right? That as people learn to understand that they can connect to the creator or the higher being, whatever they want to relate that to, that they are no longer beholding to whoever it is at the top who says they have the power to make that connection for them. But then, of course, that's the fear of the person in power, that they're going to lose control and lose power when everybody understands that they're powerful.
And they've taken a position of power in order to cover up their own fear. Right?
Yeah.
Because power is a way to cover up your fear. If what we're learning, if our global spiritual awakening, if that does not lead us individually as well as community into a greater capacity for love, we're playing the same old power and religious games that everybody's been playing for centuries. And it's only, what I love seeing is that what used to be the peripheral, that is the fringe dwellers, the mystics and and the deep souls, that's moving toward the center. And as a result, you find this huge clash that is being exposed, because all of a sudden the power systems are shaking. And you know what's at the base of that is something simple, and the language of my people would be like, you can hear the Holy Spirit for yourself. And religious system has always held on to identity and information in a sense of control and magic. And it's like, no. This has got to work for a child. If this isn't real for a child, or real for someone who is in an entirely coerced environment, then we're playing some kind of game here, some kind of mind game. We're going to go back to our, modern Western post-enlightenment rationalism as the place we're going to go run to hide in. And that's a power system. It's not a relational system. Relationships are at the core of everything.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And so do you deal with that theme in your novels? Because with
Absolutely.
the shack, it's funny when you read about it, you think, oh, is this a murder mystery? Is this a religious book? And so it's very intriguing. And so I'm curious with the novels, do you weave these universal truths into them through
Absolutely.
story?
Yep. And that's why it upsets the religious people, because it's not religious. And although I'm using imagery that they recognize, because I'm actually trying to be helpful here. And one of the beautiful things about fiction is that it allows good fiction. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's me, but I'm saying that good fiction, and I grew up reading good fiction, actually it creates more space than it uses, and it has the power to sneak past your watchful dragons and enter in through the heart, not just through the head, because most of us, that's where we're stuck, especially in the West. We're really stuck in our heads. And what's happened, the shack was a phenomenon. I made 15 copies at Office Depot that did everything that I wanted that book to do. No, it's really true. It never crossed my mind one time to publish anything, because I just didn't know that world at all. And so 15 copies literally did everything I wanted that book to do. And then it turns into this phenomenon, because my friends start giving it away to their friends, and it just starts this whole chain reaction. And it's now, that's the crazy thing. It's in the top 100 best-selling fiction novels of all history.
Oh,
Wow.
I know. And it's just rippled. I mean, it's the number 2 book in the history of Brazil. Croatia adopted it as a country, as informally, as their book of the decade. And just like the ripple effect of this thing. And it's, what it is? It's not religious. It is relational. In fact, it's so human that people could easily find themselves inside the context of those pages. And I didn't see that coming. I'm just writing something for my kid. In fact, what I'm trying to say to my children is, this is my story. And I want to tell you about the Creator, the divine Trinity for me, because I love Trinity. But I want to tell you about the God who actually showed up and healed my heart, not the God I grew up with. And it's really centered in love and loss, which every human being on the planet experiences. If you want to find a commonality, it's love and loss. And we're surrounded by both. And it's the human experience. And so and that's what I did. I wrote a story that's just centered inside of love and loss. And to me, the greatest loss a human being can experience is a loss between a parent and a child. And so that's, I'm so glad I did that. Even though I wrote it for my own kids, I use that as the centerpiece. And it's not graphic. It never is graphic, because I wrote it for my kids. And I think, again, if you write well, you don't need to be graphic in order to try to prove your point. But it's wrenching, because it's so real. And because I went that deep, it picked up all these other losses along the way. And so many people, even cultures, could identify with the elements of loss in our humanity in the middle. And the questions that we have, about the character and nature of God, what it means to be human, all of that. So, I tell people that my novels are true, they're just not real.
Yes, yeah.
Like any parable. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was beautiful the way you described that, how, you people are into the story and they don't even know they're learning something. I don't remember, you phrased it much more beautifully than I just did, but I think that's an art, and you've obviously succeeded.
See, and this is why I think fiction is so helpful, because fiction is actual. There's a respect that the reader will hear for themselves, something that matters to them. Whereas nonfiction is actually aimed at trying to convince someone or to reduce the space so that it matches mine. So I'm trying to get your space to match my space. And so it's a whole different thing. And I've been around a lot of religious theologians, very, very intelligent, bright people who've never read anything fiction in their whole life, as if it was something beneath them. And because nonfiction is an environment where power and control can be displayed much easier than fiction. Because fiction is, you have to actually let go of control. Now, if you don't, then fiction becomes propaganda, and it's really easy to spot. And a lot of religious people can't write fiction because they end up always creating propaganda. And I know, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm saying we Christians, we can't even write a decent love song because we're so disconnected from our humanity, And it's like, we have to allow the Spirit of God in someone like Elton John or a Jackson Brown or somebody to connect to our humanity in a way that we know that what they're doing is inspired, and we can feel it in our bones.
And so that book was followed by, after you realized you're an amazing writer, obviously.
I still haven't realized that. I just like, whatever.
Oh my gosh. Well, so what I'm curious, the theme or the message in Crossroads and Eve.
Yeah. So Crossroads is Kim's favorite book of the three novels, and Eve is actually my kids' favorite. So and my kids are 27 to 39, and our kids. And so Crossroads, the theme in Crossroads is how does transformation get inside the world of someone who doesn't want it? And so Crossroads is much more community-centered and relationship, like outside of the divine. Not outside, but that's not the right way to put it. Because the shack is really centered on an encounter with the divine. Crossroads is God with skin on. That is how community then infiltrates my world in such a way that it begins to soften me and open me up to transformation. And so, in the shack, the main character is a very likable human being. In Crossroads, the main character is an ass. In fact, his name is Anthony Spencer. He goes by Tony, but his name's Anthony Spencer, which is our youngest son's Xbox avatar. But I gave Anthony his middle name, which is Sebastian. So it's Anthony Sebastian Spencer, and the anagram is ass, because he is. And so it's like, okay, so how does a person who is so lost inside their own damage, how does grace climb into the middle of that person's life? So that's Crossroads. Eve, frankly, is the hardest thing I've ever done, because with the shack and Crossroads, it was like jumping in a river where there was nobody else in it. I mean, it was just like, go with the flow, go down the river, wherever the river goes. Eve is like jumping in a river full of boats and people, because what I was trying to do was, the biggest catalyst in my life theologically with my own community was the issue of women. Most of my damage came from men, and most of the people who showed up and granted me some space and grace and kindness were women. And so here I am inside of a religious world in which I'm saying, like, why are we treating women the way that we're treating women? It just made no sense to me. So I really did a lot of work, yeah, on the scriptures and theologically on the issue of women. And a lot of it came back to the, the story of Genesis. And so Eve, here's what I'm trying to do. Sounds crazy, but and I thought it was impossible. And that is to put 40 years of work theologically into a work of fiction accessible to a teenager. So my main character is a 15, 16-year-old trafficked girl. And through her eyes and through her experience, you not only see a movement towards healing and transformation, but you begin to see a different narrative for our origins and theologically that would give us a much better understanding than the kind of narrative that a lot of us grew up with. And I'm being careful. I'm being careful about the Hebrew language. I'm being careful about the traditions. And yet I'm saying, like, we have a narrative that actually doesn't match that. And I've done the work. So it's fiction. In fact, it's a little bit difficult for the older generations to grasp, because it's more of a science fiction fantasy framework. Whereas the Shack and Crossroads are much, even though they have the element of the beyond the normal, they're much more grounded in our normal human experience. Whereas Eve is sort of otherworldly in a way, and yet because of that, you're allowed to play with certain things in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And the young people, and in fact, it's a go-to book in the trafficked community of all things, and because of the healing process. And again, hard. I edited out, and the book's probably, I don't know, 78,000 words long, but I edited out 55,000 words in the editing process.
They always say, edit, cut.
I know. I love the editing process, but iron sharpens iron if the angle's right.
Well, so did you discover through the research and things the reason that religions tend to put women down or put them on the back burner?
Sure.
Is actually because they're afraid of their powers, their intuitive abilities?
Yeah, they're afraid of a lot of things, and we ended up with a very masculine deity, and we even within scriptures there's plurality within the being of God, even within the Hebrew scriptures, but this issue of what we've done with women, and it goes back to ontology, that and it's right in Genesis, right at the beginning, Genesis 1, where it talks about made in the image of God, male and female, made in the image of God. So it's like, no, we're talking about a God who is spirit, who is expressed through this beautiful, and Patrick mentioned it off when we were talking off line about the fact that there is genetically, biologically, so little difference, but that difference is really significant. But it's expressions of humanity. It's not expressions of value or expressions of importance or significance. Like a friend, to use my language in the way that I grew up, I have a friend of mine who was a pastor for years. He said, I can't believe that all this time we thought the universe was birthed into being by three men in love with each other. I know. So funny, but it's kind of a mindset, and you can't really challenge that until the system begins to crumble, which is one of the most hopeful signs on the planet, is that the systems are being exposed for, it cannot give you the things that it purported to promise. We're going to have to deal with relationship for all of that, and see what happens.
So, Paul, before we run out of time here, because we're quickly, unfortunately, reaching the end of our show, I'm really loving this discussion, but can you let everybody know how to reach you if they want to find out more about you and what you do?
Sure. So, I have Instagram and Facebook and all that. Not good at it, but but if they can go to WM Paul Young. WM is just short for William. WMPaulYoung.com, and that'll hook you to all the other stuff, and they can track it there. I'm all over the place in terms of stuff I've done that's on YouTube and stuff that I've done. It's all out there. And
yeah, you are pretty easy to find, but I did find that you need to put the WM in front of it because apparently there's a British singer named Paul Young too.
Yeah. Every time you go away. Yep. I know. I get that all the time. I had a stalker who thought I was that Paul Young.
Oh,
he was kind of disappointed when she found out that I wasn't.
Case of mistaken identity.
So it's so great, so funny.
And as we mentioned, you're going to be at the Global Spiritual Awakening Conference. What are you going to be presenting there?
So one is on the ontology of being human, which we've touched on some, and the other is on a very practical, everyday sort of thing, and I call it living inside the art of living inside one day's grace, and because this is what children do, and there's got to be a way that this is not some really complicated, convoluted thing. But what does that mean? In order to stay inside the grace of one day, you have to move in the direction of trust. And that's how you combat fear, because fear, you're going to go in one of two directions: control or trust. That's it. And so it's like, all right, so how do you actually live this sort of way in such a way that, I was listening to John O'Donohue, the poet, and he was interviewing with Krista Tippett on being, and he made this beautiful statement, like poets can do. And he said, I think almost all stress is a perverted relationship to time. And I love that. I think that is exactly right. So that's sort of what I'm after in that presentation is, how do we then live as we are growing and developing? How can we then live? And it's inside the grace of only one day at a time. And stop being future trippers. Stop creating imaginations that don't exist and then trying to control the universe so that the things you're afraid of don't happen.
Yeah, and I can see where part of that too is to find your pace so that we aren't buying into this cultural standard that we all have to be multimillionaires. I mean, is that even really good for the environment or our culture or even ourselves to push ourselves to that point?
Yeah, I know. I mean,
well, it's been a blast talking to you, Paul. Unfortunately, we are now out of time, so we want to thank you for spending this time with us today.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Catherine. It's been an absolute honor being with you.
And for all of you who are with us today, we love having you with us too. So please stay connected with us on Facebook at Spiritual Journey Radio. Be sure to like our page so that you can be part of our life and we can be part of yours. You can study with us or get a reading with us at intuitiveschool.com. This has been Spiritual Journey on Truth Frequency Radio, simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, among others. This is Patrick.
And this is Catherine. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you at the Global Spiritual Awakening Conference, we hope, or on Spiritual Journey next week.
All right. Goodbye for now.
Woohoo!